and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we're going to dig into something that many of us experience in relationships. The feeling like you're too much, you're too needy, too intense. It is a question to hear all the time, especially when someone craves that emotional depth, their connection and care, but doesn't feel like it's being reciprocated in the way that they need. So they start questioning themselves. So what if the issue isn't about your needs? What if it's about finding someone who can meet you where you're at? Now, before I get into this today, I want to say thank you again to my longtime listeners for your thoughts, your comments, your questions, and those of you who are just finding the show now. Your questions, all of your feedback, your willingness to ask all of these uncomfortable things and dive into this stuff with me, it's what keeps this space growing. So if you haven't yet, do me a favor, take a moment, rate, follow, subscribe wherever you're listening to. This allows the show to continue to grow. It allows others to find it. It allows them to maybe hear something that resonates with them. And if you feel moved to support the work that I do here, there's a donation link in the show's description. Every little bit helps. So today, we're talking about emotional needs, how they show up in both the regular vanilla world and our BDSM relationships. So in our lifestyle, emotional and sexual needs often feel a little bit more intense, a little bit more amplified, if you will. It's not just about the physical side, it's about the care, the connection, and the vulnerability. But here's the deal. It's not always about the chemistry. It's about finding someone who matches your emotional depth. When that doesn't happen, it can leave you questioning, maybe it's me. So today, we're going to explore why you might feel like you're too much, how you navigate that, how your emotional compatibility plays a huge role in finding the right fit, both in kink and some of our more traditional relationships. So first, let's go ahead and begin with emotional needs, those fundamental desires we all have for connection, intimacy, and understanding. These aren't just things we want, they're the things we need to feel seen and heard and loved. When these needs go unmet, it's not just uncomfortable, it's disorienting. You start questioning yourself. Are you asking for too much? Are you just being needy? But the real reality of this, emotional needs are essential to our emotional and psychological health, to our overall capacity. They're part of what makes us human, and when they're not met, we feel it really on a deeper level. And when we talk about emotional needs in relationships, we need to touch on attachment theory. Attachment theory is the whole psychological framework that explains how we form bonds and how these bonds affects our relationships. The way we attach to somebody else, especially in childhood, shapes how we form connections later in life. And I've talked about this before. If you grew up in an environment where love and affection and emotional support were consistently available, you likely developed what we call a secure attachment style. This means that you were able to trust people, you were able to rely on them and feel safe, and you could express your vulnerability. But not everyone has that experience, and for those of us with anxious attachment style, our emotional needs can feel more intense. People with this style often crave constant reassurance. They need more attention. They need more emotional closeness. And when those needs aren't met, it can feel like the world's crashing down. There's a deep fear of abandonment. For some with anxious attachment style, love often feels conditional. This can lead to a pattern of self-doubt, questioning whether your emotional needs are just too much. These types of people think, am I asking for too much? Am I too intense? And this is where the feeling of being too much comes from. When your emotional needs aren't being met, it's easy to start feeling like you're needy or demanding. But in reality, what you're asking for is completely reasonable. It's simply that your emotional needs aren't being met by your partner, and that causes a disconnect. Now, over time, this can lead to internalized beliefs that you're unworthy of care or emotional intimacy that you definitely desire. And it can leave you confused about what's yours to ask for and what's not. Adding more to the frustration is the emotional landscape that we have that's highly complex for each person. So how do these emotional needs show up in our relationships? When we don't feel emotionally supported by our partners, we start to feel like we're asking for too much. Maybe you start feeling like you're being clingy, or you're asking for more attention than your partner is willing to give. But in reality, if you're craving emotional intimacy or care and your partner can't meet you at that level, it's not a flaw in you, it's a mismatch. Now, your needs are valid just as much as theirs are, but it's important to recognize that the feeling of being too much often comes from not finding the right partner who can meet you where you are. If there are things, and I want to add this caveat in, if there are things you are struggling with, then you may need to work on them before you enter a relationship. And oddly enough, I was just talking about this with somebody. And we have to reassess when we want a relationship and ask ourselves, what do I need to feel secure? Am I asking for X, Y, and Z, but right now I know that I can't even move past M because I'm struggling in that area? Our partners there are also not for our repair. Our partners are there to meet us at our level, we're supposed to complement each other and build a better relationship together. But our partners are not there to fix us. So if you do need something like that, then there might be some personal work to do before you enter a relationship. And this is where self-awareness comes in. Before you find that person who matches your emotional needs, you need to understand what those really are. And this isn't just about asking for what you want. It's about understanding your emotional desires, your kind of concern and connection that you're seeking, your limitations, your boundaries, all of these things that start to make us who we are. And as a matter of fact, a comment that I received the other day discussed this, that I'm doing all of this in my relationships and people are just leaving because they can't meet me there. My response was, then those are the people that you don't want in your life. If they can't respect that you have boundaries, then those are the people you don't want to engage with, because that means over time they were just going to continually walk all over you and use you until you are emotionally spent, and then they will move on. So that's not a healthy relationship either. So without all of this understanding, it's really easy to start to feel like you're asking for too much, when in fact, you're simply seeking a level of connection and care that's deeply important to who you are. Now, this total concept here becomes even more highlighted when we're inside of our dynamics. Because inside of the lifestyle, it often emphasizes the emotional depth, care, trust, vulnerability, the openness to express our erotic fantasies in ways that aren't really as common in traditional relationships. And it's not just about physical touch or sexual play, it's about building trust, intimacy, connection on a really profound level for all of us. BDSM relationships require both of us to be more emotionally attuned to one another, constantly communicating our needs and our desires, not just physically, but emotionally as well, to check in, to talk, to make sure we're doing okay, that we have the capacity to keep moving forward. This level of emotional intimacy is often deeper than what we have found in our traditional vanilla relationships. And that means more emotional needs play a bigger role inside of our dynamics, not less. So if in the lifestyle, emotional compatibility is an absolute key, it's not just about chemistry or physical attraction, it's about being emotionally in sync with your partner. Our relationships require a high level of vulnerability and trust. So if you're emotionally misaligned, no matter how intense the connection is, it's not going to be enough to sustain the relationship long term. So when we talk about emotional needs, whether vanilla or lifestyle related, it's about understanding that those needs aren't too much. They're simply the level of emotional connection you need to feel secure and supported. And finding the right partner who can meet you at that level is what really makes the difference. Also, taking time to find the right person and ask them questions. Because it's not about just jumping in either. We don't jump in. We've never jumped into traditional relationships. We went on dates. We talked for a while. We've exchanged texts or emails or calls, or maybe even video FaceTime. But the reality is we take time there, but we tend to take a little bit less time just because we're in the lifestyle. Oh, you're kinky and you like to be flogged or tied or wear latex. Great, I'm all in. But you're not asking the deeper questions. Does this or could this meet me at the level I'm going to need it at? And then a month, 2 months, 5 months down the road, you figure out you're no longer compatible. And this is where this whole impact of feeling too much starts to come in. So let's really dig into something that a lot of us struggle with, the feeling of being too much. Now, whether it's feeling like you're too needy, too intense, or too demanding, that internal narrative can be a huge drain on your emotional processes inside of you. And it's not just frustrating, it can have a real impact on your emotional well-being and your relationships. So when you're constantly carrying the belief that you're too much, it can lead to emotional burnout. Imagine constantly feeling like you need to shrink yourself in order to fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. And it starts to drain your energy. You might find yourself putting more effort into managing how much you're asking for and constantly wondering if you're asking for too much and overcompensating by suppressing your true emotional needs. Now, over time, this takes a toll, not just emotionally, but physically as well. You feel like you're in a constant state of tension, walking back and forth between a line, always walking on eggshells to avoid being perceived as too much, too needy, too overbearing. So this creates a cycle, one that over time becomes really difficult to break. When you're conditioned to believe that your emotional needs are too big, you start second guessing yourself. You doubt whether your needs are even valid anymore. Is it really okay to ask for this level of attention, or are you being unreasonable? This self-doubt can lead to a lot of frustration because it feels like you've never really been seen for who you are. You're constantly navigating between trying to be enough and feeling like you're asking for too much. Now, I'm going to pause here because I know the question is going to be oh, well, what if somebody is too needy? They're too clingy all the time. How do I deal with that from the other side? Well, I do understand that. And this is where you have to have a conversation. This is where you sit down with your partner and say, look, I'm really interested in you. I really enjoy spending our time together. I like doing X, Y, and Z, but I need to understand on this level why you may need more attention so I can maybe compensate for that or explain why that might be a little bit too much for even me. And all of a sudden, now you're having a dialogue. But for those that may be worried, like if I do this, they're going to leave. Well, then the relationship wasn't going to be sustainable anyways. But getting through this, understanding yourself and letting your partner express themselves is how a relationship grows. You stifle a relationship's growth by keeping these emotional needs to yourself, letting them ruminate over and over in your head, and then eventually the relationship just falls apart. And then the cycle starts over again. And then by that point, you're trying to figure out, I'm no longer dating, forget all these people, I don't trust anybody, I don't trust myself, and then we spiral. And then typically they end up talking to somebody, and we spend a lot of time trying to go over this, we identify the pattern, and then we start working through it, right? And this is what I'm trying to show you here. The emotional burnout doesn't just come from feeling unacknowledged, but it feels like it comes from a feeling like you're asking for someone that, or something that others people can't or won't even give you. And the worst part is you start internalizing these thoughts. You believe that your needs are really too much to be met, that no one's going to be able to take care of you. So when you take that idea and it burns inside of your mind, it affects your self-esteem. And you begin to question your own worth inside of a relationship. And then that overarching question stays there. Am I too much for people? Do I just need to stop wanting so much? Do I need to stop voicing my desires, my concerns, or my wants? All of it. We start shutting down. These thoughts create frustration, and it's not just with others, but ourselves. And then the cycle repeats. We start degrading ourselves. We start beating ourselves up. And you end up feeling like you don't deserve what you truly need. That frustration builds into a sense of emotional depletion. Constantly giving, trying to make your needs smaller, but then never feeling fulfilled. And then the cycle repeats, right? So there is then a role of self-worth here. And this brings us to this deeper issue. how self-worth is intertwined with emotional needs. So when you feel like you're too much or too needy, it directly impacts your sense of value. You start believing that you're asking for something that's not valid, that you're somehow asking too much to be loved or cared for in a way that you want or need. And this is where our emotional needs and self-worth are linked. If you're not getting your needs met, you might start questioning whether you're worthy of having those needs met in the first place. And here's where the reframing starts to happen. Your needs aren't too much. Your emotional needs are valid. Everyone has them. Everyone should be met in a healthy relationship. The issue isn't here that you want too much. It's that you may be asking the wrong person, or perhaps you've been in a situation where your needs weren't acknowledged or even respected. That doesn't make you unreasonable. It makes you human. We have to reframe our mindset. We have to start by understanding that our emotional needs are a part of who we are, not something to hide or diminish. We also have to make sure that what we're asking for is reasonable. We can't expect our partners to take off work if they work the night shift to come tuck us in, because that'll emotionally make us feel better. We have to learn to find that common ground. They're at work, they're doing their job. We can't ask them to stop and do something to make us just feel better. It's not reasonable. I am talking about things that are reasonable, right? So the real work is finding someone who's emotionally equipped to meet you where you are. You shouldn't feel like you have to apologize for your desires for depth or intimacy or care. It's not about shrinking yourself, but it is about finding someone who can grow with you and match your emotional depth you require in a relationship as much as they do. It's about finding compatibility, not compromising who you are. We've all been taught at some point or another that we need to settle or maybe adjust our needs to fit someone else's idea of love or affection. But if the real work isn't about making your needs smaller, but finding someone who can rise to meet you. And when we reframe it like that, you start to see the problem isn't you. It's about being aligned with the right person who sees the value in who you are and wants to meet you there. And we often forget that because by this point, in our late 20s or early 30s, when we're really starting to get a sense of who we are in the dating world and the things that we want, if this becomes the case, we've shrank so low to meet everybody else, we no longer even know what we like because we're so afraid to express it that we're just going to be shut down. Now, when we take this into the lifestyle context, this is where things get really interesting because the roles can be fluid. A person's desire for emotional depth and intimacy may actually be seen as strength, not a weakness. And think about that. BDSM is all about vulnerability and trust, intimacy, desire on a really deep level than what's often required in traditional relationships. It's not just about the physical side of things. It's about building a connection that's emotional, psychological, and physical all at once. Total capacity. And I've spoken about that many, many times. And this means that when you're in a BDSM relationship, asking for emotional depth and connection isn't seen as being too much. It's an essential part of our dynamics. Now, for example, in BDSM, whether it's about the dominant or the submissive or the top or the bottom or a power exchange relationship, wherever you fall within that gambit, knowing how to communicate to your needs to your partner is completely vital, right? BDSM requires clear communication about our desires, our boundaries, our emotional needs, the things we want to explore, our limits. It's not just about some role we chose to play in the scene. It's about that depth that we've created behind the roles. And when partners communicate openly about what we need emotionally, it strengthens our bond and it creates a deeper foundation of that trust and intimacy that we were seeking in the first place. That vulnerability comes from allowing ourselves a place to go for the deepest emotional connections we can foster because there's a clear understanding that everyone's needs, emotional, physical, psychological, are important and should be communicated and respected. And this is also where emotional compatibility inside of the lifestyles is really important. BDSM really requires that both of us, or both partners for the most part, are not only emotionally in sync, but also emotionally equipped to meet each other's needs. If you have a dominant They may be expected to care for their submissive's emotional well-being, offering reassurance, supporting while engaging in power dynamics. Now, a submissive might crave, emotional safety or intimacy along with those physical sensations. And that need for deep emotional connection isn't only about seeking approval, it's about seeking mutual understanding and trust. The roles may shift and change, but the emotional communication still remains key. So, in our lifestyle, the idea of being too much for someone simply doesn't apply in the same way it would in a traditional relationship. In fact, I would argue the emotional depth and vulnerability are what create the bond. And the emotional intensity that some might see as overwhelming in vanilla relationships can be welcomed and definitely respected more so in our dynamics, where the emotional connection is often important, if not more so than the physical side. So if you're someone who's craving that depth, BDSM could provide an environment where those needs can be met in a way that aligns with your emotional and sexual desires. I'm not saying BDSM is for everybody. I'm not saying you have to run out and try it, but there are deeper levels that I think go a lot further than vanilla relationships. Because all we do inside, we should be doing, I talked about this before, but I'm going to say it as it's something that should be non-negotiable. BDSM is about communication. It's about asking for what you need, being clear, and alignment. It's not about shrinking to fit someone else's idea of love or care or submission or dominance, but about negotiating the relationship in a way that works for both parties. And when you find someone who understands and respects your emotional needs, it's a relationship where you can feel seen, heard, and valued, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Isn't that what we are all truly seeking? So let's talk about one of the biggest struggles we face in relationships, the mismatch of the emotional and our sexual needs. So if you have a high capacity for intimacy and passion and connection, it can feel really frustrating when those needs aren't met. And it's not just about the physical side of things, there's a deeper layer, the emotional needs that come along with wanting a relationship that's emotionally rich and fulfilling. So when you're attuned at this level of connection, it's really easy to feel like others don't measure up. This mismatch can be especially difficult when you're deeply attuned to emotional and sexual intimacy. People who crave emotional bonds and intense sexual connection can feel like others flatten out or disconnect early in the relationship. They might not be able to meet you at the same emotional depth or sexual intensity that you want. So what starts out as passion or chemistry can quickly feel like it's fading or lacking the emotional spark that you need to feel fulfilled. This isn't about being picky or demanding, it's about alignment. So when two people aren't equally matched or in their capacity for intimacy or passion, the connection doesn't have the same depth. And over time, that mismatch becomes really noticeable. And you find yourself questioning whether you're asking for too much. Is it too much to want someone who matches your emotional or sexual depth when you're used to feeling deeply and wanting a partner who engage with you on that level? It's easy to feel like you're asking for something that's out of reach. You might even start to wonder if there's something wrong with you or you're for needing that level of intimacy. But the truth is, when your emotional and sexual needs are that intense, it's not a sign that you're asking for too much. It's a sign that you need to find someone who has the same capacity for emotional and sexual connection. You can't expect someone who doesn't share that level of need or ability to meet you where you are. Then you're projecting onto them what you want in the hopes that they can rise to it. You can't do that either because then you've already set yourself up for failure. Yeah, but I don't want to wait. Well, waiting is part of it. Finding the person that's going to match your needs takes time. It can happen overnight. I'm not saying that these things don't, but the reality of finding that one person that's going to match you on your levels is very difficult, and it takes a while because you have to be willing to understand all of these things about yourself, what you're willing and not willing to negotiate, and then hoping somebody can meet you there. And that requires a lot of patience, right? Now, if we look at the other side of this, when we're talking about how this mismatch doesn't just cause frustration, it does lead to a lot of deeper psychological struggles, particularly feelings of inadequacy or fear of abandonment. And if your emotional and sexual needs aren't being met, you start to question your worth. Am I too much for this person? Why can't they meet me where I'm at? These become some of the questions that are just about unmet desires. That's not what you're actually asking. They're about feeling like you don't fit in, like you're too much for the people you attract. That fear of abandonment becomes real. So if you're in a relationship where your needs aren't met, you might just start, fearing your partner's not going to stick around, or you're too demanding for them. This can trigger feelings of insecurity right away. And then the spiral begins, thinking that there's something wrong with your needs or you're not worth the effort. But again, this isn't about your needs being unrealistic. It's about finding someone who can connect with you at the same emotional and sexual level. So if you are emotionally or sexually intense, it's natural that you'll need to find someone who can match and meet that energy. Don't pick somebody who is not really sexually inclined or doesn't express themselves emotionally to date because you have a high sex drive and you talk about your feelings all day. That is a complete mismatch. You're not going to change them. And going into a relationship saying, I'm going to change that person, I'm going to open them up, that's not your job to do. That's their journey to do. And so if you go into that type of relationship and you try to get this person to become more sexually adventurous or to be more emotionally open, and they are going to be much more free-flowing, it's probably not going to work, and they're going to meet you with a lot of resentment. We don't go into relationships to change people. We go into relationships to grow with them. But if we're doing all of these different things, this can feel like a cycle, though, right? It's constantly meeting people who seem promising, but the connection fizzles out when you realize they can't keep up with you emotionally or even sexually. It leaves you feeling misunderstood or even rejected, even if that's not the intention of the other person. And it's easy to internalize these experiences as a reflection of my own, your own self-worth, our own personal thinking, right? And we go back inside of ourselves. Maybe I am just too much. Maybe no one can handle the depth that I need. But we have to understand that this is the natural part of the process of finding compatibility. If your emotional needs or your sexual needs are high, then your partner needs to match that energy. If they don't, it doesn't reflect badly on you. It's just simply a mismatch in what you both need. But don't go into these relationships. Don't let your partner say, oh, well, I really like you. We match on 3 of the 12 points that we need. So I'm going to try to quell your sexual desires and your emotional compatibility and just calm you down. It's not going to work. And like I said before, conversely, if they don't have a high sex drive or they don't like to talk about their feelings, you're not going to change that in them. Maybe it's uncomfortable for them for different reasons. And the more you do, the worse that divide is going to get. And all of this brings us back to the lifestyle, where the need for all of these things, our emotional and physical compatibility, is really pronounced. Inside of BDSM, our connections have to go hand in hand. Our relationships, we build them on trust, communication, discussions, emotional vulnerability, desire, fantasy. These relationships are not just about power exchange or their sexual satisfaction. They're a deep emotional connection that involve both of us being open, both of us being vulnerable, and both of us being attuned to each other's needs. And the importance of finding a partner who matches your emotional and physical capacity is much more crucial. Partners who are not emotionally aware or are even open to some sort of deep connection may not be able to meet our needs. And then this causes the frustration. Our relationships demand an emotional depth that isn't always easy to find. And then there's an understanding that both partners need to be able to communicate those needs just as clearly as their physical ones. So if there's an emotional mismatch here, whether that's vulnerability or trust or sexual desires, it can create tension or discomfort within the dynamic. And the dynamic in BDSM relationships is different because it involves a clear agreement on the roles and boundaries we are entering into. But that agreement also has to take into account emotional compatibility. And our lifestyle requires constant communication, not just about physical play, but about the emotional safety, care, and trust that are involved. So without clear communication and understanding of each other's needs and what we want and our desires, that connection is probably going to falter. This isn't about meeting someone's needs on paper, it's about emotional resonance. Our dynamics often require, continuous check-ins, or they should, right? I stress that a lot. We should be checking in with our partners at least, I don't know, every couple of weeks, especially when you're new. How are things going? How are we aligning, right? This way we can ensure that our physical and emotional needs are being met, especially in a way that's respectful and fulfilling. And this becomes the moment where we start talking about the things we need. We don't shrink down and say, oh, everything's fine, when underneath we're not okay with something. Emotional needs are seen as equally important as the physical ones. The depth of communication and understanding is what makes the relationship work long term. So when you find a partner who's not only physically attuned to what you want, but emotionally aligned as well, that bond goes beyond the whole sexual and physical aspects of the dynamic. It becomes richer, more fulfilling. We feel heard, we feel valued, and most of all, we feel understood. And I see this when so many people are talking about, I've gone through my second sub in a month, or I'm on my 9th dom inside of a year. So you're misaligning constantly. Maybe it's time to start reevaluating what your needs are and why you're potentially not having them met. Are my needs unrealistic? Right? I never entered a relationship going, I want a perfect 10 who just says yes all the time. That's not realistic, right? Sex 24 hours a day, never going to happen because I have a job. I had jobs back then. I'm tired, right? I just don't do those things. That's the reality. But how about something more realistic where I want a partner who I can go to when I'm having a bad day and I want to be able to talk to them. Or I want to talk to them about places I want to go with them, and I'm hoping they'll meet me there, right? I'm not going to choose a partner who loves spending all of their time doing stuff in the water, they love to swim or they want to go diving in the ocean, and I'm a mountain hiker, and they hate walking. Well, that's going to be a misalignment, and at some point, you're going to get into that relationship and say, God, for a year now, I've been asking them, and I just don't know why they don't want to come with me. Because they told you in the beginning, they only like to go diving. They only like to go swimming. They don't like to walk. And then that resentment builds. And then the relationship ends. So let's talk about a path forward here. If you've been struggling with feeling that your emotional needs and your sexual needs are too much, you have to reframe the narrative, right? You have to look at your desires, both emotional and sexual. They're not too big. They're simply part of who you are, and that's okay. The key isn't shrinking them down, but finding that person who meets them. It's recognizing that your needs are valid and important, and it's not about compromising who you are, but finding the person who aligns with that. And I'm restating this again because I'm trying to drive the point home. Because I see this. I see this in people that I work with. Yes, but I'm I'm in a bad relationship and I know this person's not right for me, but if I just stick around a little longer, you're not going to change them. You're not. That behavior is going to continue. You're going to continue shrinking. And the unhealthiness of it is going to keep moving forward, and then the relationship collapses, and then you go inward. If we reframe our needs to recognize that we're not asking for the impossible, it's then easy to fall into the trap of thinking that our desires are too much, right? If we think that everything we feel it can never be achieved, then we are going to have a problem, right? The truth is that people are out there that can meet you at your level, but it's just about finding them. So the next time you feel it, you're that self-doubt creeping in, remember your needs aren't too much or too big, right? You just simply need someone who is capable of understanding and embracing them. That may take time. And this is where patience comes in. And yes, it might take a while to find that person, but you have to ask yourself, am I worth it? Is finding them worth it? I'm not saying you're going to marry this person, but if you want something more fulfilling, it's going to take time to find the right person, and learning how to discard those people that don't meet the criteria of what you need. It doesn't make you having high standards. It just means you have needs that need to be fulfilled, and these people can't match that. So the work here is in recognizing that it's not about just shrinking down or, removing your desires. It's finding a match. Relationships require compatibility, and that includes emotional and sexual alignment. If someone can't meet you where you are, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a sign that, they may not be the right partner for you, and that's okay. And this brings me to my next point: self-work and reflection. You have to take a moment and ask yourself, how well do I understand my own emotional needs? Am I in touch with what I require to feel emotionally fulfilled? It's easy to overlook our own needs, especially if we've been conditioned to believe that we're asking for too much. So start by reflecting on your own emotional landscape here. What do you truly need from a partner? What do you want? What makes you feel secure, heard, even validated? If you don't know the answers to these questions, how do you expect your partner to? You have to understand your own needs, because in knowing you have to learn then how to communicate them effectively inside of a relationship. And that's where our boundaries come into play. These become the limits we set to protect ourselves and our emotional well-being. And if you don't have a clear understanding of what those boundaries are, it becomes easy to lose yourself in a relationship or to compromise too much of who you are to meet somebody else at where they are. So setting boundaries is about understanding where you end and where somebody else begins. It's about knowing what you will and you won't tolerate, and what you need to feel safe and respected. And that's not too much. So maybe practice some self-validation here. It's really important. This is about recognizing that your feelings and your desires and all these emotions you have are valid, regardless whether or not someone else is meeting them. We rely too much on other people's validation, and it can lead to a sense of emptiness or self-doubt. Self-validation is about looking inward and acknowledging your own worth and your rights to have needs. It's an empowering process here, and it allows you to show up authentically in your relationships, both romantic and inside of the lifestyle. And let me tell you, I don't just say this, I put this into practice. I have my own self-doubts. I make sure, am I giving the right advice? And then I go inward if somebody doesn't take it the right way. And so I don't let them know that, but then I rework it after maybe a session or after a scene or whatever the case may be. And then I analyze it, and then I go from there. But, I show up. I do what I do for the community. I do what I do for the military because I love doing that every day. It's why I show up. And then I remind myself why I'm doing it and how happy I am. I don't care if things that I write get 10,000 likes or 50,000 views or none. If one person reads it and it helps one person feel better, then I have done what my intentions are. That's how we learn to self-validate. I wrote this, I stand by it. I've said this, I stand by it. And I just hope it helps. And I know I did the best I could do. Nothing more, nothing less. Right? And then I move on. I'm a human just like the rest of you. I make mistakes just like the rest of you. But that's how we learn and we evolve. And I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And guess what? I've learned from each one of them. And then it's led me to the next part. And then I got to something I didn't learn, or something I didn't understand, or something I didn't know, and I tried, and I maybe succeeded, or maybe I failed, and then I learned and I evolved again. And it became a part of this pattern. And then I talked to myself about it, and I said, you did that well, or next time you do this, and then you move forward. But enough about me. Let's talk more about BDSM and how it really does create all of this emotional exploration and connection and respect for us. Because we know how, and we understand about communication and vulnerability and trust, right? But if in the lifestyle we are celebrated for our emotional depth and the unique needs that we bring to the table, whether it's through negotiation or trust building or power exchange, our lifestyle offers a space where emotional and sexual needs are not only accepted, but they're embraced. So this environment for us of self-acceptance and the ability to express our desires is welcomed for us to do it openly. We have to remember that finding someone who can match us, right, on our journey isn't about being too much. It just takes some time. It requires patience and self-awareness. And you know what? Maybe you're going to kiss a few frogs along the way. That's all right. But every step brings you closer to the understanding not only yourself in a better way, but what you truly need in a partner. And trust me, it's worth the effort. Don't settle for a relationship where you feel like you have to shrink your desires or hide parts of yourself. Then down the line, 5 years, 10 years, you start to ask, who am I really? Right? Hold out for someone who can meet you at your full depth, your full emotional range, and know that there's power in waiting for the right match. Right? First and foremost, I want you to remember that your needs, no matter what they are, they're not too much. And what's often at play here is finding that compatibility. Right? It's not about you getting smaller to fit someone else's idea of love or affection. It's about understanding yourself first. Your needs, what makes you up, how you respond, your boundaries, and then applying that to finding someone who can meet you there. Not necessarily has to be pace for pace, but at least coming towards your level. Your desires are valid and so are theirs, and the right person will be capable of aligning with that. Look, whether it's BDSM or a vanilla relationship, knowing yourself and understanding your needs is the key to something healthy, something long-term, something fulfilling. And people are going to say, oh, yeah, but I'm all alone. You're not alone in this journey. A lot of people face these struggles daily. And as I said to you before, the most important thing is to keep learning, growing, and most of all, be patient with yourself as you move forward, right? I want to leave you all with a question today to reflect with and think about. What does emotional fulfillment look like to you, and how do you start to align your relationships with that vision, right? What I'm trying to do here is I want you to start thinking about, not about that you're too much, but are you asking from the person you're seeing or the person that you want to be with, will that align, right? So take your time with this question. Let me know, what you all thought about this. I want to hear your thoughts and comments, your other questions. This show was brought by an AMA, which is why I decided to talk about it, because there's a lot more to what this person was asking me about, right? I want to touch base on a few other things. First, I appeared a while ago, recorded with Hi There Catsuit on Authentically Kinky podcast. That episode is out now on his show over on YouTube. Please go find it, have a listen, leave some comments. Such a wonderful, I really appreciate the space he opened up and got a chance to speak with them. I'm going to bring him onto the show and have a conversation with Hi There Catsuit here in the near future. I've got to do that. Again, as always, I apologize to Red Leather because I know I got to get her on, but it's not her, it's me. It's my scheduling right now. I'm busy. I've still got a couple other conversations I need to get to, and we have some other things, some other exciting shows coming up. Your questions, I have gotten some. Am I asking you too many deep things or about the lifestyle or psychology? No. But I'm going to reiterate this point. Please do not ask me for things that are psychologically or therapeutically fishing, right, for a diagnosis or help. I'm not going to answer those questions. First, I work for a living, right? And it took me a long time to learn all those stuff. So please respect that's what I do for a living. And if I'm not answering you, it's not because I'm dismissing you or I don't want to. It's just because that's what you're asking me. Second, the questions on privacy. And I want to say this. I respect everybody's privacy, and I have a right to my privacy. So please stop asking me about it. I am not going to discuss it. There are other reasons why I've discussed that publicly once before. I'm not going to go into it. I have a right to my life outside of what I do for a living. If that's not okay, well, I'm sorry, if that's not an adequate answer, but this is where it's at. Don't discuss it, right? As my plug, my friend always reminds me of my book, Tangled Desires, the intersection between psychology and BDSM. Yes, you can get it wherever you get your ebooks from, or if you want a print copy, there is one. Don't say I didn't warn you. It is a little repetitive. It was the first thing I ever written in my life as far as something of that structure. I put a lot of psychology into it because I thought that would make it better. It was just a mistake, right? I didn't know. So if you want it, get it. It's not very expensive. It's out there. It's something you can, add. It'll definitely, it's got some points in there for new people or even, seasoned vets that need to kind of remember a few things. It's there. Okay. It's not a New York Times bestseller. I'm okay with criticizing myself. I know it's not. Right. Anyway, let me know what you think about today's show. Right. If this has happened to you, if you're struggling with all these things, there are people out there. There are wonderful people you can talk to all around the world. Right? You can get help with, maybe you're struggling with. There are groups online, right? But again, remember, be patient with yourself. That's the key takeaway today. Your needs aren't too much, but you got to learn to be patient. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.